Terminal.
Our chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down, feed off.
Bring in, feed off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to NASA Spaceflight Live. We're very happy to have you. This is the weekly show talking about all the week's news in the space industry. You can, at any time, ask questions of us using @NASASpaceflight in chat. We have a lot of topics we're going to cover today, and we're excited to get to them. Joining us today are Philip Sloss and Adrian Beil. Hi, guys.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going really well.
Hello, everyone.
So you can ask them questions at any time. And before we start today, we do want to take just a moment to acknowledge the passing of Glenn DeVries, who was one of the New Shepard astronauts and the co-founder of the clinical research platform Metadata Solutions, who died recently in a plane crash. If you're interested in learning more about that, Blue Origin has issued a statement on the matter on their Twitter. Today, we're going to be talking about Crew Dragons 2 and 3. We've got a very beautiful Starlink deployment to talk about. There's news about Artemis, New Glenn, and always Starship. And we're going to go ahead and start off talking about Crew Dragon 2 and 3. What's going on? Let's start with 2. Adrian.
Okay, I can start. So, Crew-2 returned from orbit with the NASA astronaut Shane Kimber, Megan MacArthur, JAXA astronaut Hoshide, and ESA astronaut Thomas Pesquet. They returned on, oh my god, Monday night with Crew Dragon Endeavour and had a successful splashdown in the Atlantic Ocean. So, like, a good mission. And the second crew rotation for SpaceX there looked good, and they already had a great recap video. And as we can see here, the re-entry of the capsule with the NASA plane, which name I forgot. But I love these footages always. I love to see the footages when they record the re-entry.
Looks like a UFO.
Is this? I think is this the WB-57 or one of the WB-57s that they use? I know that they use those for doing some imaging like this. Although this is just this is the thermal imaging. I think they have they can certainly be equipped with multiple, not just like this infrared style imaging, but also visible light as well. I remember from the shuttle days when they were trying to do high altitude tracking during the ascent.
Also, I love that we are 3 minutes in and shuttle was mentioned. So I think chat will love that. What we should maybe address is the parachutes, right?
Right.
There was a slow deploy of one of the 4 parachutes, one of the 4 mains. It did deploy after, I think, 70 seconds, was about 60, 70 seconds late. But what we also should add here, that this was not a major concern. They looked at it, they looked what happened there, but the fact that they launched Crew-3 right a few days later is a good indicator that there was no major concern about this.
So even with one parachute down, there's all the astronauts are still okay. Is 3 pretty much the limit there? Do you still want 3, or could they even have 2? How much redundancy is in the system?
They can land with 3. In this case, they landed with 4. So that the 4th one deployed in the end. But they can land with 3. So in a case where one of them totally fails, the astronauts would be fine with 3 parachutes. You can see it here. The 4th one is a bit to the side and just wiggling around, not fully deployed.
Now, even though everything went well in the end, looks like a jellyfish, Russia still sort of kicked up a little fuss about this, right, in terms of their cosmonaut program?
Well, I can see how they might do that. I guess I assume that they're wanting a similarly thorough investigation as we ask for when, when they have runaway International Space Station modules docked to the station. So, yeah, I have a feeling there's a little bit of that, but this is
Tomato.
probably right. Right. I don't know how you pronounce what the Russian word for tomato is, but if I recall correctly, this behavior is something they've seen before. There's a difference between, well, we've seen this before, and so you can see in the video here, the fourth main parachute is completely disreefed at this point. So they had all of them, and it wasn't right before touchdown or splashdown. But I think it's one of those things where they've seen this behavior before, and really, they're probably just going to continue to try and collect information on it. And ideally, you would have a thorough explanation for why this happens. I think we've seen some discussion that it's a consequence of having 4 parachutes, and that whichever parachute happens to disreef completely last, or is the last one to disreef, can be slow like this. But it wasn't a fouled parachute, and so it did eventually completely inflate. So, I think it is probably worthwhile to continue to investigate this and continue to, try and continue to explain it, get to a root cause, make sure that their design, it obviously has margin. And so then you would want to chase this down and make sure that there isn't anything unexpected about it. But I mean, it doesn't. Again, that's the most important thing for them, just in terms of this. This became an indirect handover from Crew-2 to Crew-3. It had originally been intended that the Crew-3 launch would occur before Crew-2 returned, and you get to do this direct handover where the crews get to do an exchange and a briefing on the station, and then Crew-2 would return. But due to the whatever unspecified medical issue there was with one of the crew members of Crew-3, they didn't get to do that. But they needed to make sure that they were good to launch Crew-3, seeing this behavior, and then trying to make sure it was okay to continue with the Crew-3 launch. And they obviously decided that that was the case.
Have they said anything more about what that medical emergency might have been?
No, and I mean,
Nope.
I have a feeling, I know it's the case here in the States, but it's really up to the individuals whether they want to disclose any medical information at all. And if they don't want to, then you can get in some big trouble if you do that against somebody's wishes.
It's probably taco night. Josh Wilson just did $7 Canadian and said, "Tell Jack to stop using Internet Explorer so his browser issues stop." And 2, when is the FWOOP merchandise coming out? FWOOP.
Stay tuned.
You got me.
What?
I'm not sure what department that is in.
So what happens when
That
I miss
isn't-
an episode of NASA Spaceflight Live? I don't know any of the in-jokes anymore.
That's more in the Starship section. We will talk about FOOPs later.
Okay. And then Musical Wolves also pointed out with $5. Thank you, Musical Wolves. Before shoot 4 fully inflated, it did look like a jellyfish. I guess a dragon can land with the jellyfish effect and not just take off with one.
But hopefully not.
Yeah. King is asking, what do you think the hardest part of Crew Dragon recovery is?
Recovery. You mean so? For instance, what's the? I mean, the most important part of it is obviously that you have the splashdown at a good descent rate, and then as long as the spacecraft, I imagine that the crew could stay on the spacecraft for a decent amount of time. It's probably not the greatest boat, but it's probably seaworthy for a little bit of time. If they, if you had an abort early in launch, for instance, they might have to wait for a while for the recovery crews to get out there. So there's a couple different ways to look at it. I guess perhaps the the second most important thing is for the recovery forces to reach the spacecraft as soon as they can. So that's another thing. And then you can see, having seen this is the third crew to return on Dragon. I believe they basically secure the spacecraft first. They don't come out of the vehicle until they get back to the recovery vessel. And so, that those are a couple of different things depending on how you want to define recovery. A safe landing is important, and then in terms of the recovery, if there's an issue, it's great to have the recovery forces get there as soon as they can, to assist if they need to, and hopefully you don't need to, and you can just go through the procedures to make sure that it's a safe, that the area is safe for people outside and the people inside.
What I love is when we were able to see in fleet cam in our fleet cam camera that they are practicing these recovery operations sometimes in this harbor, where you can see them dropping this demo Dragon capsule there, and you can see them practicing these recovery operations, which is really a cool part of this whole that there's a team behind this that practice all of these steps and make sure that when the day finally comes, they are ready, and they are just doing this methodical spooling of the program and make sure everything is safe and fast.
We have a question here from Marcus, who asks, can Dragon use Super Dracos to make landing survivable if there would be a critical chute malfunction, or I guess in this case, multiple chute malfunctions? And would you explain the Super Dracos?
They cannot. I know there was this early talks, very early in the Dragon development about propulsive landing, but in the current version, they can't. The parachutes need to work, and basically, if they with them fire right now, you would just boost the capsule up again, and then you are in the same situation again, that you need parachutes to land safely. So the parachutes working is a pretty important part of recovery. And to add that, Super Dracos are the abort thrusters of the capsule in the case that the crew needs to get away from the rocket at launch very fast.
So there's enough propulsion there to sort of alter the path and get them away from the rocket in an emergency, but not enough to actually slow down for a significant amount for landing. Dank Jeb asks, did Crew-2 land in the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico?
That's a good. I don't know. Okay, so it was off. It was off of Pensacola. So it was. There was a. I was at the Cape a week ago Friday. So a week ago yesterday, and of course it was raining on Friday the 5th, and so you had a very strong weather system pass through the east coast of the United States. So I imagine it was they were probably destined to go farther west and into the Gulf to do that, just because it would give them more margin. But yes, somebody in our ear, thankfully, told us that they did in fact land in the Gulf of Mexico.
Just trying to come up with an excuse, like an excuse, like, I mean, it's connected to the Atlantic. Okay.
It's all one body of water, man. We've got some questions here about Dragon in general and its operations. Tony Jebsen asks, NASASpaceflight, what limits the Dragon time on orbit? Soyuz TMA-09 managed 215 days.
I'm not sure what the limiting factor is. I'm totally honest here. I heard, I remember talks about the solar panels being like a limiting factor, but somebody maybe will correct me on that. So I'm not sure what the limiting factor is, but there is a limiting factor, obviously, how long they can stay in orbit.
Yeah, I'm not. I apologize. I'm more of a specialist in the Artemis. I know for the Soyuz, if I recall correctly, it has to do with, I think this I think came up the last time I was on, which I guess was a couple weeks ago. And for the Soyuz, I think one of the limiting factors has to do with their the composition of the propellant, that it breaks down after a certain period of time, and is not as effective um, with their reaction control system jets, and those are also used for doing in like a deorbit burn maneuvers. And so I can't remember if I think they've stretched from time to time. There have been a few situations in which they had to delay, just like with Crew-2, they had to delay the return a little bit. But yeah, and I don't, so the only things I can think of maybe or to mention would be things like maybe hatch seals or things like that. I know in talking to some of the folks in the Orion program, their limits in terms of long duration limits, when you're talking about hundreds or even thousands of days, is things like hatch seals. And it's not necessarily that they can't extend those. It's you just have to have a more robust set of seals for the hatch. But I'm not sure if that's the case with Dragon. Probably is not. But those are the kinds of things that probably limit it to. And then also it's just certified for 180 days plus margin. Oh, it's probably 210 days. I apologize, but plus margin, so 210 plus margin. But it's possible if they needed to in a pinch that they could probably extend those through some additional analysis.
Insofar, there was no need for them to look if it could sustain longer anyway, because these rotations right now are in these fixed spots, and they just decided, okay, that's the amount we need right now, so we will look at that amount, and most likely, with the commercial crew program, NASA even said, okay, we need capsules that can sustain this long in orbit. And probably they certified for what they need for the commercial crew program.
Before we talk about Crew-3, which would be the next one, Adrian Bedard, thank you for becoming a launch director member. We really appreciate it. Thanks for helping keep NASASpaceflight Live going, as well as Bill Machi with $5, who asks, does SpaceX only have one mission control? How do they handle simultaneous missions?
Well, you can have that's again, I apologize for not knowing the details specifically, but you can have in a particular control center, you may have multiple flight control rooms. You may also just be able to, from a single flight control room, you can have multiple streams coming in. And it's really just a question of making sure that if you have a flight controller that's monitoring two spacecraft at once. This might not be the case, but you want to make sure which, to highlight which one's which, so you don't get confused. But they may also be able to have multiple flight control rooms within Hawthorne. It's a pretty big facility, so it's possible that they have those. So now the other thing is that I think even in this case with the indirect handover, or in either case, direct or indirect handover, so far I believe they've only had one Dragon that's really active or fully activated at one time. But that is a good question: is if how they would handle that, because I'm pretty sure that they have some sort of procedures to deal with that situation if it were to come up.
Also to add to that, they also have, in theory, the second mission control in Boca to control Starship operations from there. So they at least with Starship, they now have some operations there to operate some of it, not from their main mission control. But yeah.
All right. We've got a whole bunch of toilet questions, but let's go ahead and start talking about Crew-3 before we get into
space toilet. Or are you talking about just general?
Space toilet questions. I think.
Please let it be space toilets.
Although I'm quite happy to talk about the virtues of a squatty potty. All right. So Crew-2 came back down, and Crew-3 went up again. Do we know how long those astronauts are going up there for, and what their mission might be while they're in space?
I think again about 180 days, right? They should be. I think the next one is slated for March, April. Doing a quick Google here while I try to gain time. The next one is for April 2022. So
I mean,
about as long.
they're the 6 months is generally going to be I think they're going to maintain the same type of expedition sorties that they've been doing with the Russian Soyuz for the entire life of the program. Now there've been situations where they've had to extend and some expeditions for 12 months or longer, but I think that's the idea, is the baseline would be 6 months at a time, 6-month crew rotations. So I think that's a reasonable expectation. And in this case, we had a situation with bad weather and with an issue with the crew, the crew that was launching, and that that'll happen from time to time. But they still were able to handle it, and you've got the full complement of crew on the station again.
So
we got great fog.
You got what?
We got great fog pictures with the weather. So first we had some problems with the weather, and then we got great weather for the launch. So, which was amazing. Like oh, that was the wrong launch. Sorry, I confused the launches here.
You did it, me.
Oh my god.
So the astronauts who went up, by the way, were NASA's Rahad Cherry, Thomas Marshburn, and Caleb Barron, and ESA's Matthias Maurer from Germany.
I was curious how you would pronounce that.
I said it wrong. I'm
yes,
pretty sure.
It's Matthias Maurer.
Matthias Maurer. Okay.
Yes.
I butchered a few names there. Please forgive me. Let's talk about the toilet issue real quick, because people are asking about it. On the return to Earth, there was one of the toilet in the Dragon was down. It was inoperable. Do we know why, and if they have backup procedure for when that happens?
Yeah, that was so the problem initially came from the Inspiration 4 mission, and was basically a pipe, a hose was leaking a bit of remains into the capsule, to avoid some words here, and yeah, that there's a backup for that, which is the obvious backup of not using that toilet and using something else, but yeah, toilets. Diapers.
They're gonna go. So right, they're gonna, they're either going to have, they're either going to be wearing diapers, or they're going to be using, I think they used to be called euphemistically Apollo bags. But I think the diapers are probably a little cleaner. So, and I'm trying to remember how many orbits. It's a relatively short. You can deal with it for the amount of time from undocking to when they get out of the vehicle, onto the recovery ship. So I mean, we're not talking about. I think possibly the Inspiration 4 crew probably ended up having to deal with it for longer than the Crew-2 folks did. So it's it's kind of like when you're getting ready to leave. I imagine they made sure to put in stick a bathroom break in there right before they got in the vehicle to come home.
Let's spare the audience to talk about something completely different now. Starlink Group 4-1 launch. It successfully went up. It was a very, very pretty launch. This is one that you were talking about earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, because I confused launches. But we had a great shot of. So we had some fog in Cape Canaveral with the launch. It did its best Vandenberg impression with the launch. And there was this cloud layer around the rocket. It was not above the rocket. It was really just on the ground. And you can see it here. The visibility was very limited for this launch, at least before liftoff. But the good news about this is that as soon as liftoff happened, we experienced this rocket piercing through the fog and producing amazing pictures that SpaceX started to post on social media, which are just it's a cool and unique view we did not have. So there's the great shot we have with the rocket just
That
barely
is gorgeous.
visible. Yeah, it's the moment when they ignite the engines and you can see the plumes. It's a great shot and makes a very normal Starlink mission suddenly very, very cool in terms of visual perspective.
When I saw this, I honestly thought it was CGI, and it was like a render of a launch before I realized that
Yeah.
this was actually what was happening.
Yeah, that's this moment there. It's just amazing. Also, just to recap the mission, it was a successful mission. It was a successful landing for the 9th flight of B1058. So 9 flights already, which is quite nice. 9 times to orbit. I think that's the fourth or fifth Starlink mission for that booster, and the amount of satellites alone that this single booster launched to orbit at this point is just it's just crazy.
Would either of you care to summarize the Starlink program and what they're trying to do with those satellites?
I can go for it. So Starlink is an internet constellation. Right now, they're popping out everywhere. Internet constellations that are getting deployed or getting announced. They try to supply internet from low Earth orbit, which has the advantage compared to previous internet constellation that it's lower, so the ping is better and you have a better connection. They are deploying in this launch. They deployed 53 Starlink satellites for that internet constellation, and yeah, they are going to plane 4, hence the name Starlink Group 4-1, making the Starlink naming scheme a little bit more complicated as it wasn't as it weren't before. So yeah, good launch.
Very quickly, I want to go ahead and thank Mark Towner for the $5 tip there. Thank you very much, Mark. We really appreciate it. As well as Alex Baker with £5, who asks, will SpaceX employ people from different countries to go to Mars? A little bit of a different question there, but do we know how they're going to do that selection process? Have they talked at all about it?
No, I don't think they went into the details for Mars yet.
Probably going to be a while. I think
Yes.
before we get there. Let's see. Musical Wolves, thank you for the $2. We appreciate that. Tony Jebson asks, can SpaceX use Starlink for vehicles in orbit to replace NASA TDRSS? And what is TDRSS?
You could perhaps conceptually do it, but I don't know that the TDRSS stands for Tracking Data and Relay Satellite System. So it's a network that is a NASA network for in-space communications, generally speaking. So it's relaying, ground stations can send commands to assets in orbit or ascending into orbit, and receive data from the same. But they tend to use I don't know if it was only originally designed for shuttle and those and NASA type systems, but I know, for instance, you've got S-band and you've got KU band, and I don't know if it also includes the KA band with the newer. It's a multi-generation thing like Starlink, except Starlink is at a much more compressed timescale, of course. But I don't think the Starlink satellites are necessarily set up to communicate in those different. Everybody's got to reserve their own bandwidth more or less, and so I think conceptually you could deploy a low altitude system, but you're also talking to, if you want to talk to satellites that are up in the geostationary or geosynchronous altitudes, you might want to have them up at that, up closer to that altitude. I think one of the reasons that as Adrian was saying, the Starlink satellites are closer to the surface to reduce the latency that you get, because if you're going all the way up to 22,000 miles above the Earth, which gives you it gives you an orbit that is from the ground, it stays over the same part of the globe, so you can just point a satellite dish right at that satellite, and you can just torque it down and fix it. For the Starlink satellites, it's more like GPS, where they're moving. But the thing is, then the signal doesn't have to go 22,000 miles up to the satellite and then 22,000 miles down. And so, I mean, even speed of light, that takes time. And so you end up with a longer latency for higher altitude satellites. So the idea is, as Adrian was saying, was you have these trains of satellites and these different shells in different orbit planes, which allow you to service all the different latitudes, at least where you have most of the Earth's population anyway. So you could use it conceptually, possibly for some types of satellites, but it might make more sense to deploy it in different type of a deployment for different type of an application.
So how the current TDRS hardware that's up there, how long has that been up?
The very first satellite was launched in 1983. The initial set were launched by the space shuttle, and then they moved those to expendables after Challenger 51L. And in fact, they lost one. The second satellite was launched on 51L. I'm trying to remember. I think the last launch of this, I can't remember whether it was second generation or third generation. I think it was maybe in the. I'm trying to remember how it, but it's maybe in the last 10 or 15 years. But I think the network's fully deployed, and if I recall correctly, they're talking about, not replace. Well, eventually they will run out of orbit life or service life, but they're looking at different ways of replacing it, or basically like they're doing with all these other things, they're looking for a commercial entity, perhaps like SpaceX, to deploy an in-space network for either dedicated government/DoD or again these type of larger organizations, versus Starlink, I think, is at least more focused on personal internet. It's a internet service provider for individuals and perhaps smaller businesses. And if you wanted something more elaborate, then you might develop something else. So I think TDRS is going to eventually run out of service life, and NASA's looking at maybe, like these other things, becoming more of a customer than an owner and operator of a future system.
Reminds me of the roads near my house, where they take so long to actually build that by the time they're done, you've got to start thinking about changing them again. King asks here, why did SpaceX do 53 Starlinks instead of 60 like other launches? Do we know?
Most likely because of changes and to the satellites in terms of mass, so they can't just do the 60s anymore. So yeah, that is the most likely explanation why they are no longer doing 60 instead of doing now for 53. Because there was no ride share like we had before launches where they did less, but that was because there was a ride share stacked on top, and that was not the case here.
Rob asks, do we know if they were able to catch the fairings on this launch?
They are no longer going for catching the fairings. That is a plan they are no longer doing. They're sometimes fishing them out of the water, most of the time actually when they don't break, but they are no longer catching them with these giant net ships. They are no longer in use. So yeah, no catch.
John Ferris asks, do you have any thoughts on Viasat bidding to buy Inmarsat?
No.
I have no thoughts.
Sorry. That's it. Let me grab a couple more questions here, because we do have a ton about this. Let's see. How many Starlinks fail typically on a launch, or do any Starlinks fail on a launch? And then what happens to them then?
Oh, so I don't have specific numbers how many fail. That sometimes even depends on the launch. We had, for example, one rideshare that completely is decayed at this point. They either let them decay or even use the thrusters to decay them faster. So it kind of most likely depends on if they still have the control over them to decay them. But we have seen Starlinks before that basically lowered their orbit and then went back to Earth, to say it in a way more positive way than burning up in the atmosphere.
Let's go ahead and move on to Artemis. I know this is a subject a lot of people in chat want to talk about. What's going on with Artemis? We've got a very beautiful picture there.
Yes, this is I stole this one from NASA. So this actually is this is almost 2 months old now. You can see all those semicircles over on the sides where the platforms are retracted around. Those are mostly booster platforms, but we didn't get to see that last week. Those platforms are fully extended and in use right now. So they held a media day for really for Artemis. Well, no, I guess I can't say that. It was for Artemis 1, 2, and a little bit of Artemis 3 at Kennedy Space Center last Friday, so November 5th. And so they're continuing with, we published a story in the middle of the week talking about, we knew that they're getting to the point now where they're almost done with all of the modifications and final modifications that they want to make to this rocket before it flies for the first time. And they're getting into these final tests. There's some tests they're doing that are because this rocket has not flown before, that they want to get in before they fly first. And then there's a bunch of functional checkouts, just making sure that all the sensors, all the moving parts, and all the avionics boxes, everything's still working, everything's talking with each other. You have multiple stages. You now have a spacecraft on top. The core stage talks to the boosters. The core stage talks to the Orion spacecraft. It talks to the second stage, and they're making sure that then all of those pieces talk to the ground command and control system. So they'll be going through with that for the next probably about a month. Obviously that's goal-oriented. If they have issues that they have to stop and address, then it might take longer. But they're still shooting to, next time we see these platforms retracted like this, they will be getting ready to roll out to the launch pad. And actually, from this vantage point here, the mobile launcher is actually behind you and kind of towering up above your head. So the mobile launcher or the crawler transporter will pick the vehicle up and it will be going backwards from this point of view when it rolls out of the VAB. And right now it's around New Year's. So we're talking like after Christmas. It's not going to be Christmas time. It's going to be somewhere around that would be I think they would be happy if they were able to hit that. That's the current target though, is right around New Year's to roll out to the pad. A couple of weeks to get ready for the final big test, which is they call the wet dress rehearsal. It's basically a full countdown. They'll run through the entire countdown procedure, which means they'll also run through, there's a week of preps when you roll out to the pad. They have to go through all those. They'll go a little slower because it's the first time they've ever done it. But then they'll do a full countdown. They'll load the big orange core stage you can see here. This will be the first time that they're loading it at the Cape. So this will be, with a completely different propellant loading system, propellant spheres, again, different ground command system. But they're also at the same time, they're loading on the same Artemis 1, Artemis SLS launch countdown timeline. They also have to load what you see here at the bottom of this picture, which is the second stage, which is called the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which we generally just call ICPS because it's a little faster. and that's again a modified Delta for second stage. The biggest mods for there are it's a little tiny bit. The hydrogen tank is a little bit bigger to hold a little bit more hydrogen, really just to allow for a little bit more hydrogen boil off. And it also has a few things like it's got an extra attitude control system tank in it. And then when they get to the next launch, will be the first launch with the crew. They've got some additional shielding for micrometeoroids, that kind of thing. It'll be have a little extra crew rating features on it. But this is a shot that I got last Friday. This was really the only vantage point we got to get relatively close to the vehicle. This is up on the 25th floor of the VAB, and so the platform you see in the middle of the picture here, I believe that's the B platform, and it's kind of hard to see in the in this picture because it's directly opposite of us. Here is the white room is extended and docked to the fairing, to the launch abort system fairing that sits over the top of the Orion crew module. But they were busy. They were finishing up reconnecting the umbilicals. It's kind of hard to see with the scaffolding down at the bottom in this picture, but the umbilical that connects to the ICPS is a 2-connection umbilical. At the time they had the lower one, the aft connection had been at least soft docked to the stage, and they had not put the top one back on. Now, since then, they were supposed to finish that up this past week, and in the meantime, they've been doing testing on the core stage and boosters, which you can see a little bit more easily here on the left. Again, that big orange tank is, except it's not an orange tank. That big orange stage is a very prominent part of the vehicle. So what they're doing now is they're testing the communications between the core stage and the boosters, and then they'll split the testing up and run some of them in different areas at different times. So what they're focusing on the core stage and boosters, then they will move to the ICPS. And they'll be doing a series of verification tests just to make sure everything's working. And then they're also going to be doing a set of engineering tests. Those are these tests that I was talking about that you would do on the vehicle before its first flight. This is going to be one of their infrequent opportunities where you've got a fully stacked SLS vehicle to get some engineering data on it. And so they're going to do that in this flow. And then there will be a quote unquote, so this umbrella of testing is called, and they've changed the terminology on us, interface verification tests, or IVT. And then now we just heard recently that for this additional round of work, they're calling them integration verification tests. But at any rate, these will all culminate in they're calling it a big IVT, which is they're going to test the whole vehicle as a integrated whole. And then they will do something called an end-to-end communications tests, which will involve, everything that's hooked up to the vehicle and everything that's going to communicate to the vehicle during launch. So that includes, like we were talking about, the tracking and data relay satellite system. So the TDRS will be used during the Artemis I launch to communicate, and this is obviously a very busy graphic, but you can see the TDRS sort of middle left there. So up at sort of altitude, the TDRS will be communicating with Orion and with ICPS because they will be in space the longest. That the main part of the SLS is not going to stay in orbit, and so the boosters obviously come down. That data will be transmitted to ground stations. So you've got Merritt Island tracking station that's around there. You've got Ponce de Leon Inlet tracking station. Those two sites are very close to Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And then they also have a downrange site at Bermuda. They also have downrange sites that I think Bermuda is actually operated by NASA Wallops. And so they also have a Wallops is located in Virginia on the Delmarva coast. And so the rocket will be downlinking telemetry in real time to the ground stations. And then when they get high enough, then ICPS and Orion will acquire TDRS, and then they will go out to the moon. And now you're going to be in the middle. Now you're going to be talking to the Deep Space Network when they get out past GPS and TDRS. They'll probably continue to try and talk to the vehicles, maybe even all the way out to the moon. But I think the Deep Space Network will be the primary communications link. And then as they come back, it'll really just be the Orion. This diagram also includes crew return. So you have the same types of things that you would have when you have a Soyuz, or even, I assume, a Dragon. They probably have a satellite phone on board just in case. And so you want to make sure, when they get to the next mission, they'll probably want to make sure that all of that communications equipment, even if it's a little bit more of an informal thing, but they'll want to make sure that those are working before they actually would be put in a position where they have to use them. And you could also get into a situation with an abort. If you were to abort early in the mission and had to do a downrange splashdown, those phones probably really important for those to work real well. So they'll do this big test, and then this big end-to-end communications test, and they're trying to hold that for early December. And then they'll do a dry countdown run through, and this will be the first time that they're going to run, the ground launch sequencer with the vehicle, as opposed to, for these last several years, they've been using emulators to do simulations and testing. They'll do that test, then they will get they will do part of the flight termination system installation for launch, and then when they're done, as they're getting to the end of that sequence, they will be closing the vehicle out, putting all the covers over the systems tunnels, they're going to finish painting the NASA worm on the boosters after they put those tunnel covers over the boosters, and getting ready to roll out to the pad for the wet dress. And that, so the rollout right now is, projected end of December. The wet dress would probably be a couple of weeks after that, so middle January. Then they come back to the VAB after they're done with that, which would be maybe a week or so after that. And they're, the idea is to try and line things up for that launch period that opens on February 12th and closes on February 27th. But, we'll just have to see what happens. It could get, they obviously have they have these recurring launch periods. So the next one would be mid-March to the end of March. If they can't make the February window, then they'll just resynchronize their schedules. And so the other thing that we saw at Kennedy last week was they let us into the operations and checkout building, and we were able to get a peek at the Artemis II crew module and service module. The European service module, which is the main component, but it's the sort of the core of the Orion service module that was recently delivered to the Kennedy Space Center from Bremen, Germany. That's the crew module. That's in the clean room. They're finishing up welds on the crew module. That'll come out of the clean room, and then the service module will go in there. So the European service module just arrived at Kennedy at the end of October. They've now mated the other major piece of the service module, which is called the crew module adapter. That was stacked on top of the ESM, and they were bolting it down last week. And so it's kind of an odd coincidence, because the last time we were in the ONC was just about this point in the flow when the first European service module was delivered, which is like 3 years ago now. So after so there you go. So that's in the lift station in the ONC. The crew module adapter is on top, and then you can see those red boxes are covers for the reaction control system thrusters. So after they finish bolting those, it will come out of that lift station there. It'll go into that where the crew module is, that clean room. The service module, they need to do some tubing mates, so there'll be some welds and some dynatube connections. And then those two modules are kind of tracking for initial power up in the spring. And then, of course, obviously schedule dependent, they would mate them in the middle of 2022. And then there's a whole bunch of integrated testing they would do, that they're shooting to hand the completed spacecraft over to ground systems in the middle of 2023 for a launch, probably, somewhere in the first quarter of, at least that would be the target anyway, somewhere in the first quarter of 2024. I know NASA just last week announced, they were talking about, they rebaselined Artemis II, so they have this almost, I think it's I don't know if it's a congressional mandate, but they talk about these agency baseline commitments to these large projects that cost billions and millions of dollars. So they rebaselined Orion to I think it was $9.4 billion over the last essentially decade. They changed the content of that baseline a little bit, and then from a schedule standpoint, what they did is they basically, from a compliance standpoint, they're saying that they're saying the launch is no later than May of 2024. But again, that usually I think the issue is the last commitment they made was April of 2023, and so they're going to miss that by a significant number of months, and so that's why they had to redo this baseline, that plus the content. So and then the last stop on the tour, we swung by ULA and saw we kind of got the same view of this is the ICPS for Artemis II. We really didn't get to see the interesting part of the vehicle, which would be around on the backside. But ULA is kind of shy about showing that to us. So, yeah, we'll be seeing, that's going to move over, I think, to the operations center here, or they're going to need that space here pretty soon for something else. So that they were getting ready to move that. If you guys recall, when they moved the first one over to the VAB for stacking, it was in this kind of this metal cylinder. It's vertical and sitting in this metal cylinder. Well, that was actually just off to the left here. So they were getting ready to stick it back in that thing, which allows them to keep all of the avionics boxes and engine equipment dry and clean. And so that's where that was last week.
Well, Philip, if you didn't have anything to say about Artemis, you could have just told us.
I'm sorry. I
love hearing that. Sorry.
I just, that's as good of a bluff as I can do.
That was wonderful. I'd like to say the photos were brilliant. Those were absolutely fantastic. I'd like to go back to your first one, the ground up view, if we could.
That wasn't mine. You mean of the vehicle? It's a great shot, which is probably why I didn't take it.
The other ones that you did take, of the wider ones,
those
NASA, were amazing
yes.
too. I want to kind of go through these one by one, because this one, the scale that this one gives is really, really spectacular. I don't know that I've seen this kind of shot of the SLS before. I'm just amazed by that.
Yeah, no, actually, it would be kind of cool. So, I mean, it's really hard to depict the scale, because one of the things you don't see like a person here or anything that you can sort of picture for a reference standpoint. So, like, you don't really have a something to compare it the size of. Okay, I know what that is. I know how big that is. So. But yeah, it's pretty impressive. Now, having said that, I've seen most of this hardware in bits and pieces. This is the first time I saw it all in one room together. So that was, it's definitely interesting to see. But it'll also be, you're also standing, right next to platforms, and there's still scaffolding around it. And so this shot was taken in mid-September, right ahead of the umbilical test that they did. And they had to clear the platforms back. So what's going to be cool is the next time they do this is right before they roll out to the pad, and that'll give us our first opportunity to see the vehicle kind of without any veil over it. When it rolls out when it comes out of the VAB, and so that should be pretty cool. We probably won't get to see this particular vantage point because this is you're standing on, probably standing on the zero deck, the zero level of the mobile launcher, the actual launch platform, and but we'll see. You'll get to see the other side of it. This is the busier side here. So you've got those 3 lines running up the length of the core stage. So from left to right, you've got the systems tunnel, which is basically like the local area network backbone. And you've got one of the liquid oxygen feed lines in the middle, and then to the right you've got those 2 metallic colored things. Those are the liquid. Those are the hydrogen and the oxygen press lines, basically to keep the propellant tanks pressurized during powered flight.
May I ask, how long have you been covering Artemis?
SLS and Orion, I've been covering, what, 5-6 years? But I mean, you have to remember, this is I was able to sneak in that shuttle reference only 2 or 3 minutes into the show. So I've been, I grew up with the shuttle. And so a lot of this is shuttle derived hardware. So I've got, I've been following this since early 80s. So what is that, 75 years? 175 years, something like that. So
I asked because I wanted to ask what it must have felt like to see the concepts of this thing for so long and see all the pieces for long to finally see it start to actually come together and be built.
I mean, since I'm old, I think a lot of people are. It's sort of a mixture. I would have to say, though, there is a good deal of, it's about time. So there's a decent amount of that. But I mean, yeah, it's like, honestly, I'm really interested in how this thing works when it flies, and so, I may end up with you guys watching the launch from home rather than one of the folks that's going to be out at the Cape watching the show, because it's only going to be 2 minutes long, and the thing is you're going to have 8 to 10 hours of countdown in front of those 2 minutes, and then it's nowhere near orbit after the boosters separate. And so, like, what I'm going to be focused on is that whole launch day. There's a lot of stuff going on, and so we're trying real hard to get as good of a coverage as we can from NASA. So fingers crossed that we'll get to do that, because we will definitely have people at KSC, and the spectacle is a really big deal. It's just there's more to it than that, and we want to try and cover as many angles as we can.
We do have a ton of questions here about Artemis before we move on. I know that we have to get to a little bit about New Glenn and to Starship as well. But I do want to cover some questions before we do that. Keith, thank you for becoming a member. We really, really appreciate it. Saturn Man asked, does Artemis rocket have a name? Apollo used Saturn V. Artemis uses, it's SLS, right?
Right. It's at least for now. It's like shuttle. They tended to just, I mean, they called the system space shuttle, but we talked in terms of STS-8, STS-72, STS-123, and so they've hung on to SLS. I guess considering its origins, in a congressional bill, it kind of fits.
Tammy Palmer asks, how tall is the SLS?
Let's see. Let me see if I can pull up the number. I think from top to bottom, all the way up to the top of the Orion is I think it's over 300 feet. Like the core stage that you see in that picture that you were talking about, that's 212 feet, and I apologize, but I am still sort of bound in these in SI units. Let me see if I can find that drawing. Nope, not that one. Of course I can't. Let's see if but yeah, it's I believe it's over 300 feet tall.
I love these pictures, by the way. It shows what an undertaking making this is, and how many people are working at one time. It's just really cool.
I love that picture of the just the top, because even this top, which is a tiny part of the whole system, is standing out in this sub room of this particular floor.
Yeah.
Because it's so massive, and that's only like the very little, very tiny part of the top of the rocket.
I feel like it's
There it
Pacific
is.
Rim. I'm like gonna go fight a kaiju.
Right. So yeah. Okay. So, and I mean, I'm trying to. I guess the very bottom of the vehicle would be the bottom of the SRB nozzles. So it's 322 feet, and I assume that the very bottom would be the nozzles of the SRBs, and the very top would be the very top of the launch abort system, which you can see here in this picture. The very top of that, the launch escape tower that you can see in these shots here. So this vehicle will be 322 feet from top to bottom.
Karsten has been very patient with their question and asks, "What's the orange color? Paint or oxidation?"
It is spray-on foam insulation. So it's a different formula for rockets, but it's similar to a lot of homes use. I know we just had our attic re-insulated last year, and they use this blowing. It's a blown on. That's different. This is and the consistency is kind of an odd thing, but it's a kind of insulation that is it's a liquid thing, and then it cures to a solid type of thing. But it's predominantly air, and it provides very good thermal insulation. You can sort of see one of the characteristic of it is that you can see it in the middle of the picture towards the top. You can see the very light colored rectangles. That's the color. That's what it looks like when it's first sprayed on. It's very light, has a very light yellow tint to it, and then it ultraviolet light. It essentially causes it to tan, so to speak, and so it will eventually get to that darker color you see here. And so basically, the things that are the darkest here that are towards the dark, burnt orange color, which that actually might have reached it reaches a saturation point where it just won't tan anymore, which is quite possible because that darkest spray-on foam insulation that's been on there for 3 years, several years now. So those light colored things, like again, those were just probably sprayed in the last couple of months. And so you'll see like repairs. The lighter areas are areas that are a little bit have been sprayed more recently. And so there are different types of, they sometimes they use robotic sprays. Like these things are, the core stage is 27.5 feet, so 8.4 meters in diameter. It's pretty big just in diameter. And so in order to apply this, they use robots and to do these, and the foam is sprayed with automated guns. But they also do mold pour foams for particular shapes. So like closer to the vantage point here, you can see sort of these brackets around the liquid oxygen, one of the liquid oxygen feed lines. Those are more like molds. So like you put a mold over the area that you want to put the foam, and you pour you mix the foam formula together, and then you put it in there and let it cure. And then there's also ones that are sprayed on with just by people with guns, and those tend to be like this. You see again these sort of lighter orange rings. Those are the more of the manual sprays. The darker ones are these robotic sprays, and then you have some other ones that are more, and then it's just what needs to happen in order to finish the thermal protection system. So
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
sorry, it's a little long.
No, it's fine. Joseph asks, are they planning on reusing the boosters like with the space shuttle, or are they pretty much one or done?
They're one and done. The whole vehicle. Yep. I think, yeah, the whole vehicle is expendable. If we're talking about SLS, so yeah, whole vehicle is expendable.
And Matt, great name, is going to follow up on that with: is the Orion capsule reusable, or is it like the Soyuz?
It is reusable. This first one, I don't believe will fly again, but I believe the intent, beginning with the second, with the vehicle that we saw in the operations checkout building, I believe they're going to try and reuse this. I think the idea is to have 3 crew modules, and that includes all the equipment inside. So, maybe not the heat shield, but the all the equipment inside, the systems, the structure, to use those in sets of 3. So this one, it'll depend on how it performs. So they'll look at the Artemis II vehicle when it comes back and see, because you would have an Artemis III vehicle, an Artemis IV vehicle, and then the Artemis II crew module could come back in the rotation with Artemis V. But they'll just have to see how that goes. They might say, well, because eventually they will have a shorter life than you would see for like a Falcon booster or perhaps even a Crew Dragon, and it'll just depend on what it looks like, because a flight cycle for a lunar vehicle might be a little different than for an Earth orbit vehicle.
Well, it's good that our audience has no opinions at all on reusability in spacecraft.
Right. So let's just move on.
Yes. Another potentially dangerous question: how many SLS and Orion are now either in production or testing?
Well, we saw the Artemis III pressure vessel was delivered to the Cape at the end of October as well. So that's already done. Probably for Orion, because they're farther along, they're sort of a whole build cycle ahead of SLS. They're probably already building structures for Artemis V. The Artemis IV pressure vessel there are pieces of that are already in New Orleans, and that'll get welded together and eventually come out of the Cape. I believe when I was talking to them, they said that they are expecting to be they're going to reach a point where they're going to have 3 Orion spacecraft in production in the ONC simultaneously. And for SLS, the second vehicle, they just had this huge hurricane that hit Hurricane Ida hit New Orleans pretty close to the facility, and they had NASA's been kind of shy about sharing about how bad the water intrusion was in. They had some real bad roof damage, and it sounds like they may have actually had some issues with some of the flight hardware, but we just haven't heard anything from NASA about that. They sort of hinted at it in this telecon they did last week. But they have the Artemis III, and they're starting Artemis III and Artemis IV. Artemis III structures are already there. Artemis IV, they're really just little tiny parts of the structure. But it's kind of the point where they're procuring parts. So before you get to a like a core stage tank barrel, each barrel they're like the hydrogen tank, you've got 2 domes and 5 barrels. Each barrel consists of 8 barrel panels. Well, before you can even machine or mold a barrel panel, you have to order the raw materials. You have to, and then it has to be processed. It has to be molded. So they're already in the process of ordering parts for Artemis IV, Artemis V, and down the road. So they're well into procurement for downstream. And so like I know our fearless leader Chris B was talking about, they just started casting the boosters for Artemis IV, the first segments for Artemis IV. They started casting those in Utah a couple of weeks ago. Northrop Grumman, that's where they produce them. So several of them are in production.
Let's go ahead and move on away from Artemis and get on to New Glenn Pathfinder. Adrian, you want to fill us in with that?
Oh yeah, we saw a Pathfinder off New Glenn rolling at case close to the factory at LC 36. To explain what this Pathfinder is, it is not not a rocket pathfinder as in that this is actual tank hardware. This is to test the new Glenn. It is more to test the ground equipment. This is for the crane operators to learn to operate with this first stage. It is for the equipment to be used and to check out if this everything is working and to learn to work with it. So that is the main purpose of this. And that is what they are doing. They're transporting it. They are learning how to transport it. They are learning how to handle it. And yeah, I think that's just my personal opinion. I love the looks of New Glenn. I think it's an amazing looking rocket. And if I see this Pathfinder, I'm getting even more excited for it because I think the fins and everything, it looks fantastic. I love it.
It reminds me a lot of the model rocket kits I used to build as a kid. Just the design of it.
all the fins to make sure it's not flipping after 10 meters of ascent. Yeah, I remember that. But yeah, it's cool to see them transporting such hardware around. I mean, this will never, like, just to be clear, and this is not like, for example, we have with the Vulcan Pathfinder that it might be flown in a later mission. This is not flight hardware. This is not to be used in any flight. But it's still cool to see progress. It's still to see large structures there, and yeah, maybe another step closer to New Glenn in the future and it flying.
When do you expect to see this turned up right?
I don't think we have a timeline yet if they're
Okay.
So do you mean like the Pathfinder, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we have a timeline.
I want to see them make it go
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, Blue Origin is notoriously shy about talking about what they do. And so I'm not sure we can even confirm that those pictures are real. Are we sure that those are? So yeah, but yeah, it looks like this is. I know for SLS they had basically this gigantic steel tube. This looks like it's a little bit higher fidelity, but it was as Adrian was saying, it's it's for handling. So the same thing. It gives you the form and fit, so weight CG, that kind of thing. So they can figure out how to get it onto the transporter, like you're seeing in these in this still. So yes, no, I was kidding. These are real pictures, but it allows them to practice handling, shipping and handling procedures, basically. So, but I don't, as Adrian said, this is not as high fidelity as the Vulcan Pathfinder that is actually not just form and fit, but also function in terms of propellant loading, pressurization, command and control. This probably doesn't have any avionics, any moving parts. It just allows them to practice, like you said, Matt. They will erect it on the pad at some point, but we just don't know. Sometimes I get the feeling that they would have preferred to be able, if they had a cloaking mechanism, they would have employed it to keep us from seeing this. So, as opposed to using it for other means. So, we'll just have to see.
I have this image now in my head, Philip, thanks for that, of a giant cloak rolling around the factory, and like it's obviously rocket shaped, and everyone is like, "Oh my god, what are they moving there?"
Right, it'll just say "nothing to see here" on it.
What rocket?
Yeah,
talking about. All right, let's go ahead and go on to Starship. I think that there's some antsy people in chat who want to talk about SpaceX stuff. You want to go ahead and lead that discussion, Adrian, on what's been happening over at Starbase?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that Ship 21 nose cone. No, of course, we have the 6-engine static fire, which happened just the other day. Which is the first time that a Starship vehicle fires 6 engines, 3 vacuum engines, and 3 sea-level Raptor engines. We first had a pre-burner early in the evening where we had the best Delta IV heavy impression of Starship we will probably ever see, because it's a wonderful wonderful event where the fire is basically engulfing the whole. There we go. It's very Delta IV heavy, which is a great rocket, by the way, just as a side note. After that they did a recycle, and we had some sort of a board, it seems, of first static fire test. We could see them ejecting gases out of the Raptors, but there was no fire involved, so maybe some sort of a board. And after that, of course, then it went to the big event, which was the 6-engine static fire captured here by Mary. And there's a difference between a pre-burner and a static fire. You can see a lot of thrust that is produced here. There we go. Yeah, love it.
Reminder while watching this, you can use @NASASpaceflight to tag us to ask any questions you may have.
Yeah, I just love that they went from 2 engines on this vehicle basically to 6. We didn't know before what they were testing, so it was one of these funny guessing streams where you're like, we don't know, it's engine testing. And in the end, it was a pre-burner of 6 engines and a static fire of 6 engines. So it's always fun to find that out after the event because of an Elon tweet, because he confirmed that this was indeed good static fire with all 6 engines, confirming not only it was 6, but only it was good, which is good.
I have to ask the question because chat will not stop. I'm looking at you directly, chat, when I say I'm disappointed in you. When FWOOP?
Okay, so some people on commentary, I don't know who, decided that a pre-burner is more of a FWOOP. And then we decided, okay, if that's a FWOOP, later there's a big FWOOP, which is the static fire. So when FWOOP, that's the whole story behind it. But chat loved it.
Just don't tell Elon, please, because he's going to start calling it FWOOP, and it's going to be a thing.
I'm not going to say who it exactly was, but I think its first name is Jack, who is involved in this.
Of course,
you can guess the rest.
That's interesting because we have a guy that works for us named Jack. What a coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Funny, right?
Jack! And that came from a few people, but also from Dank Jeb, who did $5 for it. So thank you very much.
I think we have sound here.
Yep.
Wonderful.
It was great. It was a great recording of that.
Yes, I think it sounded very clean. We had no honk, no weird sounds that sounded like one of the engines maybe decided to go away.
Sometimes the sound is actually really useful in terms of, saying what it giving you a sense of what happened, how long the engine's fired. Sometimes easier to tell than the than the video.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you get we after a few static fires, you get a sense what sounds normal and what sounds like we should be ready to track an engine removal on the next day. So, this sounds. I think this sounded great. I love it.
Musical Wolves with $2 saying the flying tile system seems to be losing less tiles.
Yes,
it does look
we
like
should.
It's getting better.
Yeah, they only lost like a few tiles, which is still not perfect. They need to stop losing tiles, but it is better than what was floating around in the internet, what might happen with this static fire test. So I think a lot of people were surprised that the heat shield of S20, which had its issues before, kept up really well. We can see it here, the tracking of the heat shield, and we see a few blank spaces here and there where they lost a tile, but it's not like a raining of tiles after the static fire. Yeah, there are few. There are few at the top, especially. Closer to the top in that area, we have some gaps.
Thank you to Greg Dietz, by the way, for the $5 and says Saturday night beer money for Adrian, who is definitely going to be sharing that beer. NASASpaceflight, are there any more tests for SN20 planned, or is it finished now?
That's the sad answer again. We don't know. I feel like it really depends on the pace on booster testing, because they still need to if they want to test on the orbital pad, they need to get it ready and get the chopsticks ready to lift the booster onto the orbital pad, so they can begin booster testing. So I guess it kind of depends on that timeline if they want to do more testing. And it as always also depends on the results you get after first test. I mean, you get some good early indicators, but as we know, sometimes it takes days to really find out if the test was perfect or if you have something that you might want to test again. So yeah. Also, since it's shown right now, we had right after the static fire had a rollout of test tanks. We have B21 and GSE4, which moved down the road. B21 being the one in this booster test stand is what we call it. The perfect purpose of this and what they are doing with this is not yet known. But yeah, they are now present at the launch site, and it looks like there will be some sort of testing with these involved, and with some road closures scheduled in the future, that some of them might be related to testing these instead of testing Ship 20 or Booster 4.
We had 200 rupees come in from Vidash, who asks, given the 6-engine ship static fire, any estimates on how many more will be done for B4/full stack and the engine configurations involved?
If we use the test, I mean, the problem with Booster 4 is we don't even know if they will test all engines at once or if they will do like stage testing of different sets of engines. So that's one problem to this answer. But I think it's a safe bet to say we will see cryogenic test, or like an ambient or pneumatic test first, then a cryogenic test, then most likely a pre-burner test of Booster 4, then probably 1, 2, 3 static fires, and in theory, then we have a full tested Starship, orbital ready Starship, a full tested booster if everything went well, and it's just getting ready for launch.
We have a question that is somewhat related from Wood4000, who asks, does the Starship static fire translate to Super Heavy? Would they immediately start with 6 engines on Super Heavy? As much speculation as you are comfortable with.
I mean, they started with 1 engine on Starship, then went to 2, and then 6. So that's just speculation on my part, but I doubt they would go 1 to 29, or 20-ish, because that would be a lot of that would be a high curve in thrust. So yeah.
Joseph asks, what a landing failure for either Booster 4 or Ship 20 do to stage 0, or what would it do?
Nothing, because they are not landing close to stage 0. Booster 4, if they're flying, it could always change. But if they're flying, Booster 4 is planned to do a splashdown a bit downrange, and Ship 20 is doing basically almost a full fly around the Earth, and then we'll do a splashdown in the Pacific. So they won't in a failed landing take out stage 0, which is probably the reason why they are not landing them right there. Because if they fail, they would take out stage 0 if they are landing them there.
Hey, we had $5 from John. Thank you so much, John, who says, my little one, Victoria, hi, Victoria, would like to know if Starship would get a docking adapter for ISS, or will the station be too small?
mean, shuttle was also big.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the question is whether NASA would ask them to do that, and whether again they may have more. There may be more value in doing lunar and Martian missions than adapting it to go to the adapting it to the station. And like shuttle had they had a long time to design to deal with approach and things. I'd be kind of curious to see how you would do how you would do the thruster firings too, because shuttle had to develop this which they had for a long time for other reasons. They had a low Z mode where they tried to only use the vernier thrusters, which were the least powerful thrusters on the orbiter. If you were to I can't remember if it was, I think they were around it was like a couple dozen pounds of thrust for the verniers versus like almost 1,000 pounds of thrust for the primaries, if I recall correctly. And it's like you really didn't want to fire the primary thrusters at the station because you could blow off or really hurt the long truss that you see here in this image where the big solar arrays are attached. And so with Starship, it would be I'm not familiar with the attitude control system, the thruster layout there, and whether they have I'm sure they could it could be adapted to do station missions. But it's a question is whether they would what's the value in it for all the parties involved, whether they want to do something like that. I mean, I think we were talking about this in the last show I was on, talking about some of these other space station proposals. The Starship all by itself as a independent orbiting entity, it could be big enough to be its own little space. It's not a little space station. It could be a space station all by itself probably. So, you might want to just consider making your own space station out of Starship materials.
I mean, just use a Raptor. The station now has practice in starting to spin around.
Right.
So-
We were talking about that in the last one.
Unintentional. Ruben asks, which is actually kind of pertinent to the last one as well, since we did bring up lunar and Martian Starship. Lunar Starship will require different engines for landing to avoid kicking up regolith, but a Starship landing on Mars won't. Is this because of gravity / atmosphere / type of regolith? What's the difference?
I mean, you have drag on Mars, which you don't have on the moon. So with Mars, if you have something that is I'm losing a word here. Kicked up. It takes a longer time to settle down again. So on Mars, you have even thin atmosphere, but you have atmosphere. So you have drag, and it will settle down faster. But on the long term, I bet you want to have pads on Mars or something to prevent dust kicking around with Raptors firing.
And then Charlie asks, any word on the FAA?
So the comment period ended. That is basically the last word we got, and there's no set date where they say, okay, at this date we will publish the final results of which we came to conclusion. Basically, it's now they will look at everything, they will look at the comments, they will look at the report and make a final call, which can be nice, it can be fancy, and yeah, we just have to wait, sadly.
All right, and I think that's going to go ahead and bring us to the end here. I think that's it, unless you guys have any more final thoughts, either Adrian or Philip, on Starship.
I should say as a side note that we also started to spot ship 23 sections. So they are now building up to ship 23 parts. And of course, ship 21 nose cone was stacked, which we also showed on Starbase Live, which is our 24/7 broadcast of Starbase.
Excellent plug there. Thank you so much for doing that. Now I don't need to, but I will anyway. Go check out the other broadcasts that we have running all the time. I want to thank the both of you for being so informative today. It's always a pleasure, Philip. Thank you for coming on, and especially with the very detailed Artemis knowledge, something that I don't know that many people here could match. And Adrian, thank you as well for just everything. Your sunny disposition.
Thank you.
You're great. Philip, where can people find your articles?
NASASpaceflight.com.
And Adrian Beil, where can people find you?
At Twitter at BC Car Counters, and as well on NASASpaceflight.com, because I also do some articles.
And I have been your host today. I am Matt Anderson. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at Bad News Baron. Before we end, I do want to give you a reminder that we do have a NASA Spaceflight merchandise store that you can go find at any time. There's lots of wonderful shirts and other merchandise in there that you can find.
Ah, the
That we
plushie.
have. Yes, the Starship plushie is new. And there's a limited amount of them. So if you want one, you need to act on it, because this is a very limited thing that they're doing. But I want one, and I need to keep it away from my dog somehow, because she wants it even more. I know that.
I can't wait for mine to arrive.
Big thank you to our members, by the way, everybody who is a continuing member who's helped support the channel, and everybody who did the super chats today with your one-time tips. We really appreciate those coming in and helping make not just what we do at NASA Spaceflight Live possible, but the wider NASA Spaceflight mission. Thank you so much for that. That's going to go ahead and end the show for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next time. For now, go ahead and go over to the live channel, and we will hang out with you there. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
Chamber pressure looks good. Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight Delta, SE off. Say again, SE off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.